Kayleigh Kozak, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Thank you for your service.
Oh, thank you.
Happy
I
Veterans
appreciate
Day.
that. Thank you.
I don't know if you served.
No.
Oh,
Nope.
well.
He's a fireman. He serves in his own way. They don't have a special holiday for first responders, but I think they should.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
No.
I know somebody that could get some legislation done. I think.
Well, thank you for being here. I'm going to start off by reading your bio, and we'll move on from there. So, Kayleigh Kozak is a remarkable force of change and the inspiring namesake behind Kayleigh's Law. Her story is one of strength and resilience, embodying the power of determination and the profound impact one individual can make. As a devoted wife and proud mother of 5 beautiful children, Kayleigh balances her family life with a powerful role as an influential stakeholder in the legislative process across multiple states to create and enhance laws that will protect and prioritize victims of sexual abuse, while also enhancing laws to hold perpetrators and the system accountable. She's a college graduate, passionate political activist, policy consultant, and the president and founder of the Because You Still Matter organization. She tirelessly advocates for meaningful change and engages communities through her work. She also was the spokesperson for Arizona's Prop 313, which would ensure natural life in prison for child sex traffickers, and recently passed in the 2024 election. Kayleigh is also an accomplished public speaker, sharing her journey and insights to inspire others. As a survivor of childhood sex abuse and an experience she never wished to endure, she uses her voice to shed light on the important issues and to champion the rights of others. Through her dedication and unwavering spirit, Kayleigh Kozak serves as a beacon of hope and inspiration for many. She will never stop fighting for you because you still matter. That's a pretty powerful introduction.
Sometimes it's weird listening to it back. Like, it's one thing to read it, right? But to hear someone say it out loud that's a lot of information in a little bio.
But it's all important, all of it, including the fact that your past, the things that have been done to you, which has probably spiraled into what you're doing now and why you're doing it. And you also have 5 children. I think when we have children, that changes our perspective as well.
Absolutely.
So let's start by talking about Prop 313. This is a measure that just passed in this most recent election. And it was something I know that you've been really working hard to get passed. So why don't you go ahead and give a little bit of an introduction on what that is and your role in that?
So Proposition 313 was something that we wanted to bring to the ballot to voters so that our voices could be heard and where we stand on the sentencing for those who sex traffic children. We hear a lot in the media about sex crime or sex trafficking of minors, especially with our border being open in Arizona. The problem is that we've realized is when you go through the legislative process, not many people hear or know about it because they don't follow it as closely as people who work within the industry. And so by bringing it to the ballot, we were making all Arizonans aware that this was, in fact, not a consequence, and that this is what we wanted to have enacted. So Proposition 313 was requiring natural life in prison if you're convicted of a Class 2 felony for buying and selling a child for sex and using them for the purpose of sex trafficking.
So it seems odd to me that we don't have laws in place already that protect children from this, and that you have to work hard to get these propositions passed. Why is it that we're this far along in our state's history and we're still pushing for things like child sex trafficking and child rape? And why is that a problem?
It's very multi-layered and compounded, and that's what a lot of this is going to be as we dig deeper into the laws. So Arizona appears to have harsh penalties on the books. Well, those don't mean anything when they're not being implemented. It's really baffling to me and actually insulting when you hear people at the top saying, oh, we have harsh penalties. It doesn't mean anything when they're not being enacted, when they're not being sentenced to that. The amount of cases that don't even go to trial anymore that take these plea deals, because it's one big circle jerk, and ultimately it all goes back to money, in my opinion. That's my personal opinion. If we eliminate the problem, we eliminate the income. And I'd love to dig more into that later. But people assume, or they glance at the laws, or you hear people say trusted resources, or these trusted titles and positions saying, oh no, we have harsh laws, or, we justice for all victims. You can say whatever you want. What's the reality and the actuality of what's happening? And it's not natural life in prison for buying or selling a child for sex. I think we also see a lot of people within this category who are hiding under false identities and proclaiming to be something that they're not, which is also a huge problem.
What's the average sentence right now? Or, you said there's a lot of plea deals, but if someone were to actually go through the process, not be able to take a plea deal, in Arizona, what would the average sentence be? Do you know that?
I don't, because everything is dependent upon the case. There is no black and white when it comes to especially sex crimes. I do know that if I'm very confident, and I know and believe, if we were to get every record from every sex crime that's been prosecuted, the general public would just be beyond disgusted and enraged by the sentences that these perpetrators and these pedophiles are getting when it comes to harming children.
What's the motivation? It seems like what you're saying is there are laws on the books, but we're not enforcing them. And it seems like what's happening is plea deals are happening, right? At the lawyer level. What's the motivation at the lawyer level to not really go and fully prosecute?
So I think, again, in my personal opinion, I don't have proof, but this is truly just my opinion. When someone is charged and then convicted and then they're sentenced, if you're not going to trial, well, everyone's kind of winning. No one's being set up. Everyone's being set up for success. No one's being set up to be the loser in that situation, right? And it doesn't matter. I know there are good people and there are bad people in every industry, but these people all know each other. They're all friends. You pat my back, I'll pat yours. Like I said, it seems to be like it's one big circle jerk. And you have these defense attorneys that are going in and, talking to the prosecutors. And obviously, again, they all know each other. And then God only knows where the judges fall into this, honestly. But if you have both parties bringing forth the plea deal, and then the judge gets to make the decision of the punishment per se, right? Like, then they get to decide. But there's so many things and variables when it comes to sex crimes, because then you have to think about probation. If they're sentenced to probation, which they likely will be if it's a sex crime, where do they fall in? How much money is made into that? If they're sentenced to so-called lifetime, what does that actually mean? We'll get into that. It doesn't mean a lifetime, I'll tell you that much. And so then the defendant is eligible to petition over and over and over again. Well, what happens when they petition? Money, money, money. It's so multi-layered. And so I don't know what the motivation is, but I know it's not to ultimately protect children and victims in our communities. That I do know.
Well, so let's talk about the sentencing real quick. How does that work? What are you going to get if you said that, follow the money? Is it beneficial for the lawyers and the legal system to keep retrying, or I don't know exactly how it works, but I would assume that once you're up for probation, maybe they keep retrying these cases and trying to get them out. And there's all kinds of backroom deals. Talk to us a little bit about that.
That's what I think happens. So I think that if you have a defendant who, it goes as far as they could be charged with multiple class 2 felonies. And then they decide not to go to trial and accept a plea deal. Well, now they've pled down to attempted, which is a class 3. So you've eliminated that, right? They're no longer, class 1 felony is murder. And now in Arizona, we've actually been able to successfully pass child rape as a class 1 felony. That's 1232, nice. Which we'll get into. Nice. But class 2 obviously is the next most dangerous, and now class 3. Well, when you look at the laws, depending on the crime, again, how old is the victim? Is it 13705, which is a dangerous crime against a child? Were they in a position of trust? There's so many factors that play into it, but you have usually a minimum sentence or a maximum, maybe somewhere in the middle. But you don't even have to implement those. Those aren't required. They're not mandated. They're just simply recommendations. I think they tell victims and communities a lot of what they want to hear to make it seem as though there are harsh penalties. Again, the lifetime thing, it's a total joke, and it is the worst thing that they are doing to victims and their families. But when they say lifetime, but it doesn't really mean lifetime, and now the perpetrator is able to continually motion year after year after year after year, money. I mean, court date, prosecutor, defense attorney, it's amazing to me how this isn't talked about more, because if you take a step back and look at it, if we eliminate that problem, we now eliminate all the people that can step in and make money.
Well, it's interesting because one of the things that I read was, I can't remember if this is 1232, but Governor Hobbs of Arizona, she vetoed one of the bills that you were pushing hard for. And it seemed like it was a no-brainer. And I think I read her response, and it was like, we already have laws on the books for that. And so talk a little bit about that. Talk a little bit about how one side can say, hey, we have plenty of laws. I think it was for pedophilia, if I'm not mistaken. That law had to do with pedophilia. And on the other hand, you're pushing for something that is, harsher penalties. Talk to us a little bit about that.
So I think the one you're probably referring to, it was 12, was it 1236? No, that was DCAC. So it was, what bill was it? It doesn't matter the bill number. It'll come to me.
It had to do with pedophilia.
Everything I do is. Yeah. But I think, so we had one bill that would require, so that was this last legislative session. So there was a bill that would require a defendant who was convicted of a sex crime that they must serve 10 years if they were convicted of a class 2 or 3 felony before they're eligible to petition to get off lifetime probation, 20 years. I'm going to start that over. So if they're convicted of a class 2 or 3 felony, the most dangerous, they must serve 20 years before they're eligible to petition to get off their lifetime probation. Class 4, 5, or 6 felony, they had to serve 10 years before they were eligible to petition to get off their lifetime probation. She vetoed that. There wasn't a lot of press, but that does go back to the fact that she said, well, there's already laws on the books for lifetime probation. It doesn't mean lifetime. And so what you're having is these victims go through the process being told that their defendant or their perpetrator is being sentenced to a lifetime, and 7 years later, they're petitioning to get off their probation. As early as 7 years. And so, yes, there are laws, quote unquote, on the books, but that's not what's actually happening. So that was one bill that didn't get a lot of attention. It was towards the end of session that she did veto, that passed with bipartisan support. I think the bill you're referring to was the sex offenders having to notify schools.
Yes, that's true. Yes. Now that you say that,
yeah,
I do remember. Yes.
So that bill, we actually ran that bill last year, and it's in Arizona, the way that the sex offender laws are. Only a level 2 or level 3 sex offender have to notify the school in the district which they live. So you'll hear people say, oh, an offender can't live within 100 yards of school, or whatever the case may be. That is not true. It's only if they're a class or a level 2 or a level 3. Now, what dictates their level in Arizona is a 19-question general risk assessment. It's a standardized assessment. The lower the score, the lower the risk is how they say it. So the problem with this is that your level as an offender is not based off of the crime that you've committed. It's actually based off of this risk assessment.
Who's doing this risk assessment?
DPS and probation. So they're charged, convicted, sentenced, then they're assessed. So when they're assessed, they do this risk assessment. There are mitigating circumstances and factors that play into this, but ultimately it's based off of this risk assessment. We are the only state in the entire nation that uses this 19-question general risk assessment. It has not been updated since 2002. And some of the questions on there, for example, are, was the victim male or female? If the victim was a female, 0 points. If the victim was a male, 3 points. If there was both genders, 5 points. Points are bad? Or more points you get or bad? The more points you get, the higher the risk you are.
The higher the risk. So female is 0?
0.
What is that even? That doesn't make any
Is this
sense.
like the SATs where you get points just by putting your name on the form? Is that kind of
I
what it
mean,
sounds like?
it's really bad. Another question is, was there one victim? That's 0 points, or more than one victim? That's 5 points. Another question is, was the victim a family member or just an acquaintance? A family member is 0 points. An acquaintance is 5 points.
What?
So
This is insane. That's
I know, and a lot of people don't realize this, right? When it comes to gauging a sex offender in the state of Arizona. And so on both sides, I could sit with the extreme far right and the extreme far left, and I could argue this both ways, meaning that you can have someone who commits a sexual crime, an uncle who commits a sexual crime against their 15-year-old niece, and they would be 0, 0, 0.
That's
You
crazy.
could have somebody who is like legitly masturbating in, we'll say masturbating in public around the corner from a park. And no child knows what's actually going on, but let's say parents see it, they capture it. It's a done deal, no question that this defendant was masturbating in public. Well, there's both genders. So that's 5 points. It's acquaintances. So that's 5 points. There's more than one victim. So that's 5 points. So now that perpetrator would score higher on this risk assessment than the hands-on crime that happened with the uncle.
Insane.
It is.
So there's no, your crime doesn't matter. Is there any points for the crime, like
No.
rape versus, public indecency?
No.
Guess.
No.
Who came up with this? I mean, I know you said,
Well, the bigger question too now is like right now, how can we all not in 2024? How can we all not agree, or anytime really? But how can we all not agree that like Republican, Democrat, Independent, it doesn't matter. We're dealing with kids. Like I would expect a Democrat to be pissed if something happened to my daughter, just as I would expect a Republican. Like, how does this not pass 100% and no questions asked? Like, yeah, let's take care of kids. Like, this is unbelievable.
Well, I think that there's so much misunderstanding surrounding how this is assessed in Arizona and how we handle sex offenders. The Sex Offender Registration and Notification Act, SORNA, which is federally, it's a mandate across, Arizona's failing 8 out of the 11 categories. But people don't know that, right? Like they assume, oh, someone who urinates in public or masturbates in public is a lower risk level. They're not. But even Democrats don't understand that. So that's why I said on both ends, I can argue it. But back to the original question is people don't understand that that's how they're assessed and that's what gets them to be their risk level. So after I discovered all this through my personal experience, I realized that sex offenders don't have to notify, not all sex offenders have to notify their schools, only level 2 and level 3 in the district which they live. Well, we have this beautiful thing called ESA in Arizona where we can send our kids to school out of district. My kids don't go to school in their district.
we use ESA. My family does.
Yeah. And so now you've found that loophole, right? So even if you're a level 3, if your kids are going to school in a different district, you don't have to disclose to that school that you're a registered sex offender. Furthermore,
So only if you live. Sorry. So only if you live in the district, you have to alert the school district in where you live. That's it.
Yes. So think about, I mean, even if you're almost on like the boundary line of a district and your kids go, it doesn't make sense, but it appears to, right? Oh, sex offenders have to notify schools. Yeah, maybe a little.
Just the one they live. The district they live in.
And then we go to level 1s. We have approximately 6,000 level 1 sex offenders in the state of Arizona.
What is that?
What's a level? Yeah.
So level 1 would be considered the lowest risk. Level 1 sex offenders are not on the DPS public registry. So if you were to go look right now on the DPS website, how many sex offenders are in Arizona? Last time I checked, it said approximately 9,700. Well, we have closer to 17,000, but they're not all on there. Level 1s don't have to register on the public registry. The problem with that is if you go off of this risk assessment, there are, from what my understanding from DPS, approximately 5,800 level 1 sex offenders that have committed a dangerous crime against a child and have been convicted under 13705, which is DCAC, dangerous crime against children, that are a level 1, meaning you cannot look them up. You cannot access their information. They are not on that website that you can use to look at your neighborhood search, and they do not have to notify schools of their status.
Give us an example of a level 1 crime.
Somebody, well, here, it's no secret. My perpetrator is level 1. So he was a teacher, soccer coach. He sexually abused me for 2 years. And he is a level 1 sex offender. So there's an example. And he had 8 charges. He pled guilty to 2, molestation of a child and luring a minor for sexual exploitation was what he pled guilty to. Class 3 felonies, dangerous crime against children, position of trust, and he is a level 1 sex offender.
But because you were a female, he got a 0 on that one?
Yeah. And female, only victim, and acquaintance. Well, that would have been higher points, but still. Yeah. So that's one example.
Yeah.
But there are approximately 5,800 sex offenders who have committed a dangerous crime against a child that are on the DP or that are not on the website. So then brings forth, okay, well, if these are the kinds of people that are sexually abusing children and have been convicted under a dangerous crime against a child, 13705, in my opinion, those are the worst kinds of offenders in society. They've committed dangerous crimes against children. So we drafted 2 bills, but the school bill, which would require a convicted registered sex offender with parental rights, yes, they exist, that they must notify the school in which the child attends, not the district that they live, which they would have to do that anyways, but the school which their children attend. Governor Hobbs vetoed that last year in April of, or I believe it was March of 2023, stating that there was already laws in place. I would argue that there was partial laws in place. What you're portraying is not the actuality. That's why we brought this forward. She vetoed it, and we joke that's the bill that got me in trouble, and that really they came after me after that one.
That struck me a little bit because it seemed to me, because I read a few articles about it, it seemed to me that they were were they afraid to have you because you were going to speak at some event with them there. Mm-hmm. And because they have an authority, because they're in the government, they have the authority to say no. It seemed like they were afraid for some reason to have you around. Like maybe their reputation would be tarnished. Maybe they didn't want you to speak for some reason. What do you think about that?
I think that I was contacted in January by Maricopa County Attorney's Office by Sean Cox, who is married to Steve Twist. Steve Twist is the ultimate drive behind Arizona's victim rights, which need to be updated immensely. And she had asked me if I would be the keynote speaker for the National Victims of Crimes Rights Week in April. And so I had spoken to them several times, and they had an award, even though they'll tell you they didn't. They were presenting me with an award for all my efforts to fight for victims. When Governor Hobbs vetoed that bill, I was absolutely disgusted, as everybody should have been, because it was closing a loophole. It was getting ahead. It was addressing a problem that existed within the system. And so I tweeted that I was disgusted. I think the bill sponsor tweeted I was disgusted, attached a picture that says Governor Hobbs prioritizes the protection of pedophiles over innocent children in schools, because that's exactly what happened. And the next day I was contacted by Sean Cox, notifying me that because I spoke out against a government official and that I was openly critical of a government official, that they could not have me share the stage with Governor Hobbs, which I did not even know was going to be there. They never disclosed that information to me. I could not believe that and I made it, I reiterated. So because I said I was disgusted and they said yes, that was the reason.
Seems shallow and a little bit authoritarian.
Absolutely. it does. Also felt like a violation of my First Amendment
Well,
right.
exactly.
but-
That's the authoritarian part.
yeah.
First Amendment. What's that?
Yeah, right.
Shh. Don't say that. Don't say disgusted either. You know, it was to me, it also felt very personal because Rachel Mitchell, current county attorney, was a prosecutor on my case, and she was fully aware of what was happening. And it was, I can't even, the personal part of it was just debilitating to me. That someone who claims that they're for victim rights isn't just as upset about this as I am, because she knows they're fully aware that this is a problem within regards to sex offenders having to notify schools. The thing is, though, it wouldn't have mattered what happened in regards to that. The award and the ceremony were addressing Kayleigh's law, which I have poured my heart and soul into to protect victims from their abuser for their natural life. Natural life injunction is what Kayleigh's law gives victims. And regardless of Governor Hobbs vetoing that bill, that was 1253 in 2023. Regardless of her vetoing that bill, that's not what this ceremony was about. It was about her signing enhancements to Kayleigh's law, which we needed. And I do thank her for that. I thank her for signing them last year. I thank her for signing them this year, because if it wasn't for her signing them, then it wouldn't have been enacted. I never would have said anything about anything in regards to any other bill, because that's not what the ceremony was about. But they felt the need to take that away from me and punish me for saying that I was disgusted.
Well, and she had passed a lot of the laws previously. Had you been in contact with Hobbs at all about the laws that she had passed previously?
No.
No?
No.
So she just saw that, it seemed to me like she was scared that you were going to come after her during the speech, which to me, again, that's the shallow part.
Yeah. Well, I mean, during the election, she wouldn't talk to people. She wouldn't.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So she vetoed that year. She vetoed two bills. I have to go back and look. Sometimes I do. This is my fourth year doing this. But she did veto that one. And ironically, she signed it into law this year. And the only thing we changed, which I was okay with. So, a lot of people don't understand, when you're working and you're writing policy and legislation, you have to work with both sides. In either side is not right all the time, and there has to be some leeway. And I will say that's one of the most frustrating parts about policy is people will, especially online, they'll come at me with should be this, should be that. Well, that's your opinion. I am interested in actualities. I'm not interested in something that appears to be something and it's not. And so the first year that we did it, the bill sponsor was very adamant about the offender having to notify schools. And and I get it. I get both sides. She was very, very adamant about that. And the Democrats, even though we didn't need them, we had enough votes, they were more adamant about DPS. Well, we couldn't have probation notifying because defendants are let off of probation all the time in Arizona. However, they must still register as a sex offender, even if they're not on probation. And so probation didn't make sense. So the Democrats actually suggested DPS notify. I don't have a problem with that. It actually feels like it's the most appropriate. So the only thing we did last year when the bill got vetoed was this year we amended it to where DPS must notify the school of their status within 10 days of the start of the school year. We were very detailed, and it passed with complete bipartisan support, and she signed it into law. So, as hurtful as it was to lose that award, I was disgusted. And I am actually very disgusted in all the people who played a part in making that decision. And had that not happened, I would not have learned who was really in my corner and who was really interested in protecting victims. There's no way I would have known. And so that exposed a lot to me and actually ultimately changed the way that I pursue things now. So it was actually a blessing in disguise.
You mentioned Rachel Mitchell. And she was part of your personal case. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes, she was the prosecutor on my case.
And then she's still around, and now she's one of the people. Her office was the one who was responsible for calling you and telling you that you couldn't come and get this award. How does that make you feel?
I honestly, like I said, I've had to really, there's two lanes in everything for me because I am a victim and I survived a crime. And so there's always the personal side, but there's the other side, the older me, the me today that gets to fight for little me. And so, deep down, of course it hurt. I felt very betrayed, and very, very just used, because she used me her entire campaign last election cycle, that she fights for victims. But me today, who gets to fight, who's in this position to fight for victims and to fight for laws that can actually be implemented and that are in actuality, it just revealed to me where these people actually stand. And so sometimes we have to put our personal feelings aside in order to pursue what matters.
Recently, over the last 3 or 4 years, we've had a huge influx in illegal aliens pouring over, and we're a border state here in Arizona. Have you seen that make a difference in the stats that you are dealing with, which is child sex trafficking and basically child sex crimes?
So I think when it comes to statistics in general, we don't have any real statistics. We've asked for them through the state of Arizona, through multiple county attorneys' offices. They don't want you to see statistics. If you see statistics, you know what's really going on. If they aren't out there, then there's no way for you to know other than hearsay. Now, I do believe in and know that we have over 300,000 children missing with the open border. But as far as when it comes to sex crimes specifically, I don't know how much that alters or affects things within what I do. And I think too, with all the things, when it comes to this topic, there's so many different lanes. And I am just so hyper focused on closing the loopholes and tightening the language to where we have laws that can be enacted. And we are so drawn to things such as when The Sound of Freedom came out, right? Great movie, great for awareness, but ultimately it pulled our attention to what's happening overseas from what's happening in our own backyards. And so we have to get back and look at what's happening here and pay attention and fix things here as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like the numbers, even the federal numbers on immigration aren't right. We know that. We know that there's all kinds of people that have gotten away with things that they probably shouldn't. Most likely, I feel like, because the government doesn't want to admit it. It seems like the same thing. You mentioned 5,800. Am I right in saying that? I can't remember. 5,800 offenders, sex offenders that I don't know if that was known or I think that was even including the unknown or something like that.
So 5,800 convicted level 1 sex offenders that have a dangerous crime against a child that were convicted under 13,705.
It seems like if I were to think about that just off the top of my head and knowing that the level of individuals, the amount of individuals that have claimed that they have been abused sexually as a minor, it seems way low. That seems very low, which means to me that, yeah, the stats aren't there, or there's a lot of people, a lot of people doing things and they're not getting caught, or they're not, they're basically not being caught and they're not being part of the statistic. Do you think that's the case? Do you think that's true?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Or I guess just not getting prosecuted.
That too.
Yeah.
That
or not
too.
even being, not even like, they never even face anything, right? Like they don't, cops don't come. They aren't even, cops aren't even called.
So there was a case, if we can call it that, recently, the Buckeye Union High School principal that he was on, I can't think what the app is called, some app where you're just a random person, you don't know anything, it's very confidential. And there was an undercover in, I believe it was Oregon, Washington, don't quote me on that, an undercover from out of state who was conversing with this principal. Stated numerous times she was 12. He asked for pictures, solicited all the things. Well, they ultimately ended up arresting him. They put a warrant out to arrest him. He was arrested. And Maricopa County chose not to press charges, stating that there wasn't enough evidence and they couldn't guarantee a prosecution based off of what they had, even though they had everything from these undercovers that ultimately trapped this perpetrator. And so he's gotten off scotch-free.
Why do you think? Protecting something? I mean, is he a government employee?
No, I don't think so. The school let him go in the next board meeting. But I think it's a combination of things. I think that quite possibly it could be they just don't want to take some of these cases. They may be overloaded. I don't know. We also had the Cody Weaver case in Queen Creek that happened where they continued to further the charges back to the police, saying there wasn't enough evidence, even though the Department of Homeland Security had come in and investigated and had everything. I don't understand. They call it furthering the case back for more evidence, as in there's not enough to prosecute. I believe if these things went to trial, my personal opinion, how much more do you need? But there just seems to not be a drive or sense of urgency to do that. It's mind-boggling to me.
Well, we talked about the cases and the laws, but what do you think there's people out there committing these crimes. They're doing it on a regular basis. I mean, is there something about our culture? Is there something about what we teach our kids? Something about how systemic in American culture nowadays, that because you see this all over, it's not just pedophilia, but it's all kinds of sexual crimes. With P. Diddy and with Epstein, there's seems like this culture of sex crimes in America.
Yeah. I think part of the problem when it comes to perpetrators themselves or the individuals committing these sex crimes, they know there's little to no repercussion. There is no certainty. You can have whatever you want. They know that's not the reality of what's going to happen. Do you think, honestly, if a sexual predator who's being convicted truly thought that they were going to be on probation for their entire life, they would just accept it and deal with it? Probably not. They know there's a chance they can get off. They know that there's loopholes. They know that in X amount of years they can petition for things. Even people who are sentenced to prison, they know after X amount of time they have under their rights, they can petition for parole or to get out or to appeal or be resentenced. They know that these options are there. If we strip them from those things and they know there's a certainty, I think we'd see a drastic change in these crimes being committed, especially against children.
You're working in other states too. Yes. Missouri, California.
So Kayleigh's law specifically is what we drafted in California because Arizona was the first state to implement natural life protection for victims of certain crimes. And we brought it to California last year and they killed it right off the top.
Yeah, that's not surprising.
It was actually frustrating and quite honestly comical because they were saying they just proved the point of money to me. Because Kayleigh's law would allows the victim to serve at the time of sentencing, this natural life injunction, meaning they cannot go back. It's in place. And it's important that we say natural life. And that's something I learned after the second year that we brought Kayleigh's law forward, because lifetime doesn't mean lifetime. There's no legal definition. So by including natural lifetime, we've just eliminated and closed that gap.
It just means you're spending the rest of your life in prison. That's what that natural means?
Natural, yeah. The rest of the remaining of your natural life.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there's no possibility for probation.
Well, that's not for Kayleigh. Kayleigh's law is natural life protection. But that's what kind of opened my eyes to the lack of language that is attached to these bills, and that lifetime doesn't mean lifetime. So how can we close that loophole? What does that look like? Well, natural. If it's your natural life, there's no arguing that. And so Kayleigh's law is what originated the natural lifetime, is what I refer to it as. And we have that language attached. So when we went to California and we presented natural life, and it was a very extensive, thorough bill. I spent days going through the penal codes attached, and this connects to that. Legislative language is complex, and they make it that way for a reason. It was a very well-written bill. But when we talked to their ledge counsel, who were very, we'll say extreme far left, they said, well, we want 15 years. Why? Why does it only be, why 15 years? Why do we need to go back to court, allow the victim to be re-traumatized, re-victimized, cost the courts more money they didn't want to give? They wanted it to be only 15 years. Well, that defeats the purpose of Kayleigh's law. We're not interested. And that's what we told them. And they stood firm in 15 years, and that was enough time for a victim to have protection, not caring that if a victim was 15 at the time they were violated and the 30, they're going to have to go back to court and reface their abuser. That puts the punishment onto the victim. That's not what Kayleigh's law is about. Kayleigh's law is about protecting victims, not re-victimizing them. So we'll take it back next year and we'll see what we can do. But
so that's what we have here in Arizona, 313 that just passed. Is natural life in prison for people doing sex trafficking, sex crimes. That's how it just passed, right?
313 is natural life in prison if you buy or sell a child for sex under 13720 is a new chapter. So that's different than Kayleigh's law. Kayleigh's law is 13719, maybe. That one's 13720. I have to look. Sometimes I do get the numbers mixed up. But 313 is, as said before, natural life in prison if you buy or sell a child for sex, if you're convicted. And there has been, last I looked, we were at 65%, or roughly around like 64.5% in support. And there was almost 1 million people who voted against this proposition.
Well, I saw you post something about that, and I thought of all the things that I've seen you post, that was maybe the most striking to me. You went on there and you said, hey, we're up 61% or something like that. But the real tale of this tale is the fact that 39% of the people have voted against it. I mean, that is a crazy stat. 39% of the people, and eventually it became, stayed about that. 39% of the people voted against. They were okay apparently with the current laws on child sex trafficking. That's crazy.
Oh, let's talk about this.
Okay, let's do it.
So that was the first ballot drop. It was around, I think it was like 9:08 p.m. I mean, I was watching, I was ready. And so our first drop was, we were at 61% and then 39, in there. And I am the kind of person where I originally was like 400,000 people voted against this. Now I had been getting some feedback prior to obviously, this going on the ballot, and the arguments that were in opposition. And it is so important to me to look at it holistically, right? We're never going to be perfect. We may have to make amendments on any bill. My gosh, this will be our 4th year having amendments to Kayleigh's law, because we have to, it's a work in progress, right? It's a continual work in progress. However, the arguments were very frustrating. And I was asked to attend a live debate on 313 with PBS. And it was right before the day, literally up to like the last hour that the opposition could have someone come and debate, that the president of the Arizona Coalition to End Sexual and Domestic Violence came on and agreed to debate in opposition of Prop 313, natural life in prison, if you're convicted of a Class 2 felony for child sex trafficking. So the main arguments that we got were a victim could be sentenced under this, and a victim could spend their natural life in prison, that a child could be sentenced under this, someone who's under the age of 18, a minor, and that there was already rules on the books. So we'll start with the rules on the books. Yes, our laws prior to 313 passing said minimum of 7 years up to a lifetime in prison. Is that happening? No, it's not.
Are they getting closer to 7? Is that what most of those offenders are getting close to?
I honestly, I don't know, but I don't think they're getting a lifetime.
But there's room. There's room for plea deals.
7 years to a lifetime is quite the gap.
It's a huge gap. Yeah.
And they'll say, oh, well, all the circumstances, and even the woman who debated in opposition said, well, it's at the discretion and all the circumstances that fall into this. Yeah, because every case is different. But if they're not prosecuting and they're allowing plea deals, what is actually happening? And then we go into, if they are getting a lesser plea deal and they are sex trafficking children, we're going to let them back out and give them another chance to do it again. They're screaming, we want prevention and preventative methods. All I hear is, you want money. If you're interested, these people hiding under these names and these titles and these entities, Arizona Coalition to End Sexual and Domestic Violence, but you're not in favor of this. Another thing they said was, and not just them, the opposition, is that a victim may be subject to be sentenced under this. No, unfortunately, that is true. However, if a victim is now trafficking, they are no longer just a victim. They are now a trafficker. Furthermore, if they are being forced or coerced, those are mitigating circumstances. They may be arrested and charged with a class 2 felony under this ARS code that just passed and subject to be sentenced under natural life in prison, regardless of if they take a plea deal or they have their day in court and they go before a jury. Do you honestly think if they were truly forced and coerced and they tell a jury and they have all the entire investigation, everything is included, a jury must find them guilty of committing this crime? If the jury does find them guilty and they are convicted, the only thing we've done is strip the discretion of punishment from the judge and the jury, meaning if they're convicted of a class 2 felony for sex trafficking a child, they shall be sentenced to natural life in prison. They still have an investigation. They still may be offered a plea deal. Even if they're not, they still may go to court and plead their case in front of a jury and a judge. The only thing that this did was take away the discretion of the punishment and the length of it. So that was one of the arguments that we got. The last one was that a minor may be subject to be sentenced under this law. Now, if you have a 17-year-old who is trafficking a child, another child for sex, they can't just be solely charged under this penal code. They would first have to be charged by the county attorney, whichever county it's in, under 13501 subsection B, redesignating them as an adult. So they would have to be reclassified as an adult to be eligible to be sentenced under this or convicted under this. So again, I guess technically yes, but then also no. It's and even if that was the case, they would have the right to appeal it to go back to the juvenile court. Do we really think that's going to happen? It may. I got threatening emails telling me that if a child is sentenced under this for their life, it's my fault.
Well, I mean, they're still trafficking. Like you said, 17, you can make your own decisions at that point.
I agree.
You know what you're doing.
I agree.
There's no, you're just a child. No, that's not a 17. I'm sorry.
And if you're forced or there's coercion, those things will be addressed in a plea deal or in the court of law. But that's the opposition that we got. So a lot of the things that were being said and a lot of the opposition that we faced when people voting no was, victims can be sentenced under this. You're not taking them into consideration. Minors can be sentenced for a natural life. People are somehow seeming to ironically forget that there's a judicial process and that those things are addressed within the process. It's very interesting to me.
Minors get lumped in with adults for certain crimes already, right? You can be tried as an adult as a minor for certain heinous crimes, as far as I know. So why would this be any different?
It's interesting that you bring that up because yes, they can. So under 13501 was just reclassification to a minor to an adult. Under certain crimes, they are automatically murder. That's subsection right. A. There is nobody can, they're automatically reclassified under those certain crimes. Subsection B is where this one falls. So the county attorney themselves would have to decide that this person should be reclassified as an adult, and it's recommended. It's not even subsection A where they're mandated to be tried as an adult.
Yeah, so it seems like a normal process that we already do with other cases that this would just naturally fall under. So the conviction of minors in this case just seems like that wouldn't be an issue because there's a normal process to weeding out yes. minors when it comes to trying them as adults.
But that was their argument. And if you tell somebody that just on the most surface level, like, hey, a minor can be subject to be prosecuted to their natural life in prison, and there's no opportunity for parole or way to get out. How can you convince someone, if they're not doing the research and looking at the laws, that that's not true? Mm-hmm. They're just going off of the headline, which is a huge problem that we see today.
Right. You all right over there?
Dying over here.
So you also talked about victims who then can be charged for a crime. I mean, it's an interesting one to think about. I understand how we'd want to be maybe somewhat sympathetic to that, but I feel like whether it's abortion, whether it's anything having to do with kids, I feel like typically the right, political right, is on the side of justice, and the political left tends to take the side of the victim. So in the case of abortion, the victim in their eyes would be the woman. Mm-hmm. In this case, it would be, they would take the side of the person who, I guess when I say victim, I guess what I mean is they would take the side of the person who is committing the crime. That's what I want to say for this.
Yeah.
I think in that case, you want to look at it and you feel bad for people who have had that happen to them as a child, who have been sexually abused as a child. But at the same time, they are committing a crime and they are doing it now again to somebody else. So there is an interesting dichotomy there to think about. But I still think that those people should be held accountable for their actions. I mean, is that your position too?
Yeah. Where do you draw the line?
Right.
If you have someone who was robbed when they were 12 and everything was taken from them, their family's house, and now they're 18 and they decide to go rob someone's house, do you say, oh, well, they were robbed when they're a victim, so we're going to be lenient? No. You don't. And it's horrible. And there is force and coercion. And it does happen, especially within sex crimes. But you have to draw the line. There has to be a line somewhere. And these organizations and these people screaming, oh, prevention, and we need preventative method. Can someone please tell me anywhere in the world where there's someone who wants to sell a child for sex, but is first going to go to an organization and disclose that they want to do that and ask for help? Please?
That's a great point. That's a really good point.
Where is this? No, those preventative methods that they're saying are, oh, well, we were going to sentence you to 10 years, but given that when you get out after 7, you have to take these classes.
Yeah, I feel like it's one thing, maybe you have some kind of problem if you're like abusing children, but if you're trafficking children, that's a different issue altogether. That's like you're doing it for money, you're doing it for power. I don't know, but that's not something you go see a psychiatrist for. You're a criminal at that point.
Yeah.
So those are definitely, they kind of get lumped together, but they're definitely different acts.
Yes. And I think that, again, people are only reading, and it was written very poorly on the ballot. I was not okay with the way, I was actually really frustrated with the way it was in there. But by voting no, you were saying that you want the current laws in place, which was 7 years to a lifetime. But again, people don't understand that. And it's just so, and capital punishment falls into this too. People read what they want to read. Oh, a sex offender, a rapist will be sentenced to death. Just because they're sentenced does not mean that's what's happening. It's very frustrating in this line of work. So I think when people are reading 313, oh, a victim can go to prison. Also, think about this too. This is not me. This is what they call them in the industry, the bottom girls, who are being forced in a way, but then they kind of lure out to their own, right? And then they're still trafficking, but they're also prostitutes by law, because there is a difference. They can no longer fall back on this now. Like, they can't say they're being forced and coerced. You know what? There's so many things with it that have fallen into it. But last I looked, there's a large percentage of almost 1 million people in Arizona that voted no. And regardless of if it passed or not, it's still concerning to me that almost 1 million people voted against natural life in prison for those convicted of child sex trafficking. selling a child for someone else to have sex with them. And our minds are wired to protect us, and people cannot fathom that. It is unfathomable that that is a reality and can actually happen.
What else is a reality is that there's a big subsection of people who want to normalize that. They don't even like the word pedophile because it's associated with a crime. They call them minor attracted persons.
You mean minor attracted?
No, I mean minor
attracted.
attracted.
Say pedophile.
Yeah.
It's minor attracted.
Yeah, that'll get us kicked off YouTube.
You mean a map?
A map.
Yeah. I say we must alienate pedophiles.
Yeah.
There you go.
It's again, people trying to normalize and condition us as a society to accept these behaviors as normal. They are not. There is nothing normal or okay about sexually violating a child ever. And people who try to minimize it, people who try to make it seem as though it's something that it's not, it's despicable and it's disgusting. But every time we get closer and closer to it, it is an attempt to desensitize us to the severities and the extremes of these behaviors. It's awful.
I think desensitize is the right word. I think with the minor attracted person thing is a way to try to get people to believe that that is okay. They don't like to say the bad words. They want to try to get you to think that it's an acceptable thing, that it's a condition that they were born with, that it's okay. I don't think that that's succeeded, but they've succeeded in many other things and many other really nice titles and the way that they word things and the way that they present things. But that one I don't think has succeeded. I think people are seeing through that. You see kind of that manifest in drag queen shows for kids and all these new books that are being written for. I mean, it's crazy. So they're really trying to permeate that level.
Yeah. With the drag stuff, if someone who's in drag feels the need to get validation from children for their sexual preference, that is crossing a line. And I believe that they often do that because they know that their behaviors won't be accepted by adults. Therefore, they need to go to children for validation. That's
crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a really good analysis. Didn't think about it like that, but I think that's really spot on.
Yeah. We're seeing it more and more. And there is, when it comes to pedophiles, sex traffickers, anybody in that category, anybody who commits sex crimes, it's not a sickness. It's all a choice. Sex offenders don't make mistakes. They make very conscious choices. They are very calculated. The grooming process is real. People don't see that it's happening to them. No one likes to be blindsided by that and feel like they have now become a victim to this person. They work overtime to manipulate and groom society and everybody around them so that when it does come out, people are less likely to believe that they're capable of doing such a heinous thing. They're moving their moral compass and they're dragging everyone along while they do it.
Yeah, we all face urges, temptations that we don't act on. Everybody. And when you start to normalize things because you say you have some disease or whatever, just because you're attracted to, let's say, a child, I don't even know if that's a real thing. I don't even know what goes through someone's head to have that happen. But we all have to have some kind of mechanism in ourselves to say, that's wrong. I don't care if I'm attracted to this person or what. That's wrong, and I'm not going to do that. And I think everybody has different levels of these things, no matter what, depending on what things they are. So I don't think it's okay. I think our society starts to really break down if we start to allow this type of thing, and we start to allow people to say, "Oh yeah, I'm attracted to kids," and then that's okay. Especially because kids can't really consent to that type of interaction.
They can't consent. They can't understand. It's horrible. And I mean, I had delayed disclosure. It took me getting out of the environment I was in to even understand that I could tell somebody what happened to me. And even then it was hard. I didn't realize I was turning him in when I did. And I think a lot of victims endure that. But how can we expect kids who have been violated to adults to also trust adults? Well, if
Yes.
we're validating these adults' behaviors and making it seem like it's an acceptable one and that there's nothing wrong with it, how can we accept that or expect them to come to us and tell us or trust us as adults? We can't. It's our job to protect them.
That's why I think there's probably so many more victims out there than we know about. I don't know if many of, especially the younger you are, the more you don't even know if it's right or wrong. You only know that as you get older. And as you've gotten older and it's 10, 20, 30 years in the past, you don't know how to speak out about it. It's a sad reality. Like, I heard a stat that 1 in 4 women have been abused somehow. I don't know if that's true, but I heard it from a pretty reliable source. And I would, even if it's close to that, that's an insane number.
That's what we know. That's who discloses. I would say it's more like 1 in 2.
Wow. No way.
Yes, that's what I would say.
That's crazy.
And men, I've had more men disclose to me than women in the last 3 years. Grown men. It's just not talked about. And
wow.
I don't blame anybody. And I think it's becoming more acceptable to talk about the things that happened or that have happened if you are a victim of these crimes than it was 20 years ago. And I think that people are just now starting to feel maybe a little bit more comfortable, but the judicial system is still not on your side. So I don't blame anybody for not ever wanting to come forward or disclose what happened to them.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing that nobody really talks about is, so you can, first of all, you come forth with something like this, and a lot of times there's accusations made about, oh, well, what were you doing to, like, that's the first thing people are going to say. A lot of them, not every time, but a lot of times there's that. And then there's having to rehash this, your trauma all the time, going to several different court hearings and people talking to you want to interview about it, and like, so you've got to relive this several times over the course of years, probably before anything's even done about it. And it's kind of like, then you see, like in your case, you see something not happen. You're like, cool, I'm glad I said something because nothing happened, so it's, I guess some people could see it as counterproductive and they'd rather just, hey, I'll just move on. I'll just deal with it. I'll just,
for sure,
internalize it or do whatever, then have to go through this. First of all, have people, call me names and disgusting, vulgar things. And it's just
yeah, you can see how it makes a victim uncomfortable to have to rehash that, to have to go through litigation, to have to do all that stuff instead of just maybe putting it behind them and living their life.
Yeah. I always say what I went through was horrible and it never should have happened. But there is nothing that compares to the hell after you turn your abuser in. Nothing. That is when you step into something that you can't even, that's the worst part. And when I turned my abuser in, I was 14. I was a freshman. I have a 14-year-old. I cannot imagine her having to deal with this right now. And to say I wasn't believed is an understatement. And we went to the week I turned him in and he was arrested. I always tell people this because it's just so real and it tells you what victims actually endure. We went to a soccer tournament in Tucson and everybody there was wearing white shirts that said, "We support our coach." And my parents said, "Do you want to leave?" And I said, "No, I just want to play soccer." Because that is all I wanted to do was play soccer.
This is right afterwards.
This was the week I turned him in and he was arrested. The weekend. And all of those people, even up to the day of court where he took a plea deal and pled guilty, stood by his side. The founder of the children's organization of the soccer club, he is who bailed him out of jail and took his side. The founder of a children's organization. And that's what victims deal with. And what my parents had to endure, what I had to endure, I don't wish that upon anybody. But sadly, that's the reality that happens when you decide to disclose and you're questioned every step of the way. It doesn't matter how much proof there is. It doesn't matter how much evidence there is. You're still having to fight to prove what happened to you, even after it's already been proven. It's horrible.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been to court, in the course of, the fire department stuff, being a paramedic, and I have documentation and the prosecutor is trying to pick apart my documentation. And I'm like, this is what happened, man. It's on this paper. Like, I can't imagine in this case, they're trying to win a case. They don't care about you.
No.
They're trying to win a case. So the amount of stuff that they're throwing out is just, I can't even imagine, you know, it's sad.
I would never blame anybody for not turning into a perpetrator. And then you're literally living with it for your lifetime. I mean, I call it my 13-year gap from the time my abuser was sentenced to 2020 when I received a phone call pre-pandemic that he was petitioning to get off his so-called lifetime probation, and I had to reface him in court after 13 years to ask the judge not to lift his probation that he asked for in lieu of 25 years in prison because I wouldn't have protection if they did. And it's been 4 years, and this year alone, my abusers had filed 9 motions just this year.
What does that mean, to file a motion?
It's not necessarily like an appeal against his conviction, but he wants to get off probation. Therefore, he files motion after motion after motion for court hearings and documents and all the things that he feels he needs to do because he wants his lifetime probation lifted.
So now he took a plea deal, you're saying?
Yes.
So now, once he gets off probation, how long does that stay? Is that like expunged from his record at that point? Does it stay on? Like, he's not going to be coaching soccer in 3 years if he gets off probation.
Maybe he already is coaching soccer.
Perfect.
So getting off probation, he would still have to register as a sex offender because in Arizona, even if you are sentenced to lifetime probation, you still must register, and you get off, you still must register as a sex offender. So he just doesn't want the rules and the oversight and all the things that come with being on probation. He completed his treatment, and from my understanding, feels like he is all better and done his time and doesn't need to be on probation anymore. So
this is it's a crazy conversation. As a man, you don't think about this much. You can't think about it like, until you talk to a victim and especially a woman, you just don't understand. We just don't understand. And
No.
It's crazy that you said many, I don't know about most, but many of the victims are men. And when you said that too, I thought to myself, man, I could see if I was a victim of that, man, I wouldn't want to tell anybody about it. I mean, it's kind of your manhood. I mean, it's a masculine thing. That would be something that really kind of chisels at your manhood, I guess. Mm-hmm. It would be tough. I could imagine how a lot of men don't want to come forward. Being a man, I could see that for sure. I've always thought, why don't women come forward? I mean, just do it. But it's pretty clear talking to you and talking about this, why they wouldn't want to. I mean, shoot, I don't know if I'd want to just put it behind you, and we don't want to have to rehash all this stuff and move on. But thanks to you, I mean, hopefully more and more people who have committed these types of crimes will get put away and will be rightfully, will get what they deserve.
Yeah.
So thank you for doing that. I appreciate it.
I hope so. I hope that, again, it's not the severity that serves as a deterrent, it's the certainty. And I think that there's so much wiggle room in our society these days for people who commit crimes. They don't take the judicial process seriously. We are a pro-perp society right now. There's more concern. They have more rights. And they know that. They know that they're going to get a slap on the wrist. And so there's nothing really deterring them or even preventing them from doing these things, and not just sex crimes, anything. And could you imagine if like public hangings were still a thing?
Yeah.
I think that people would not,
Well, it's clear. We know in San Francisco, when they passed a law to allow criminals to steal $950 or less, they started stealing stuff at $900. Now, this last election, they reversed that.
Yeah,
they voted
like
to reverse
70%
that.
or something. Yeah, they're Prop 64, I think. I think it was Prop 64.
And it seems to me that the criminals who are professional criminals know these laws, and they will do their best to get around them. So if the laws aren't strict, and if they're not concrete, they're not clear, they will find their way to wiggle around these laws. And that seems exactly like what you're talking about that's going on.
Well, think about if you have a defendant who is being sentenced to lifetime probation and you're telling the family and the victim, yeah, he may not be serving X amount of years in jail. However, he will be on probation for lifetime. Why would you ever question that when you're being told by a prosecutor in the judicial system? You're not told that they have the opportunity to petition to get off. You're not told that there's a pathway off. You're told that they'll be on probation for their lifetime. So like myself, you close that chapter and you move on as best as you can, only to be blindsided with the reality that lifetime doesn't mean lifetime. Meanwhile, you have the defense attorney or whoever is helping the perpetrator, if they have an attorney, saying, just take the lifetime. You can petition to get off in 7 to 10 years. Mm-hmm. But you don't have the judges and the prosecutors disclosing that information to victims. My parents would have never, ever even considered accepting the plea deal on my behalf because I was a minor if they knew there was a chance that he could get off. And it's interesting, too, talk about breach of contracts, if you will. In the plea agreement, nowhere in there does it say that my abuser has the option to petition to get off of probation. Nowhere. It doesn't say that in there. It just says he's sentenced to lifetime probation. It's crazy to me. And how can we expect people in the most trying, traumatic times of their life to ask these questions?
Right.
We're expecting that and presuming that we can absolutely trust the prosecutor and the judge who are supposed to be on our side. We can't anymore. I tell everybody who's encountering something like this, hire an attorney, hire outside help. You can't trust what's happening within the judicial system.
I feel like we treat sex crimes like they're not, I don't feel like we treat them like as a top crime. I feel like rape in particular, and especially with a minor, is right under murder. I mean, that's how I really feel about it, because your life is, just like we've talked about, is ruined. I mean, can be ruined unless you just move on and try to put it behind you. But even then, even if you don't have to rehash it in court all the time, you're still thinking about it. It's still probably in the front of your mind your whole life.
Well, and with that, I mean, look at PTSD, things that are out of your control. I mean, how it carries over. And I was not raped. And I still have, especially now with everything that's happening in my case, pretty bad PTSD. And it's out of your control. But there's 5 things that they say that can happen to a victim, or that roll over into a victim's life as they're become an adult. That all goes back to the crimes that were, the acts that were committed against you. I somehow, by the grace of God, was able to get through the first 4 and never be affected. But the day that my oldest daughter went into 6th grade and turned 12, I can't tell you what it did to me, because it was reality in my face. I couldn't believe that a 30-year-old man violated me the way that he did when I was her age. And now I look at it and I have, like I said, a 14-year-old who's a freshman in high school when I turned my abuser in, and my 11-year-old, almost 12, she'll be 12 next week, who's in 6th grade. I was being molested when I was her age. And I look at both, it's very surreal for me, because I can't imagine any child, but I look at my almost 12-year-old in 6th grade and think, how is someone doing this to me? And then I look at my 14-year-old and think, how the hell did I do all the things that I did and disclose and live this when I was her age? I didn't even know how to be a kid. I didn't know how to be 14. I didn't know how to not live in fight or flight. And so now it's kind of caught up with me. And that's the 5th part that they say affects victims when your children are the age that you were when you were molested. And people forget that. And I think what it is, I've put a lot of thought into this. I think what it is what happens to the victims happens. No one sees it. You just hear it. And then you grow and you move on. I say that loosely. You become an adult. You become a different person. Whereas a perpetrator stays the same from essentially an adult from the time they violated into their adulthood. They're now facing, if they've been convicted, facing this punishment, they're still being affected on a visual standpoint, right? Probation, sex offender registry, all those things. So you can see how this affected their life. It's visible. You don't have to look for it. You cannot visibly see the damage that's been caused to a victim.
I can imagine like the step that you're going through right now with your kids, like your kids coming to that age, might be the most difficult, because when it happens to you, a lot of us just internalize it. We're in control of our own destiny. We have this ability in our own mind to persevere forward. But as parents, we're the sole protectors of our children. And it's like, in some ways, we want to protect them and control their environment as much as we can so that those types of things don't happen. But when you look at your child and you see and imagine what might happen, imagine what happened to you to them, it's got to just bring everything back and multiply it, because our children they're basically everything that we've got. It's the only thing that moves on beyond our lives. Mm-hmm. And so I can imagine how that might be the most challenging part of being a victim.
It's hard. It's really hard. And I don't really allow myself to step into the lane of I was that age, because it's almost too much for me. It's almost too much. That's that.
Don't think about it. I'll be okay. If I think about it too hard, I might just fall apart. And we all do that. We all have that. If we've had stuff happen to us in the past, we have to. That's our way to survive.
Yeah.
But when you think about your kids, man, you just couldn't imagine. It just breaks your heart.
Yeah. I think because it does put it into reality and perspective for me. I think, though, I do pull some of my strength from that. And that's how I am able to do some of the things that I do. I mean, I found my justice and taken my justice back through policy and enacting these laws and writing them. But I am just showing up for the little girl that I needed when I was being violated.
Lots of little girls and boys.
Yeah.
And so, getting to know you and to know what you do, knowing that I have two young daughters, both teenagers, it's good to know that there are people out there like you fighting for this, and I'm just thankful for that, for sure. So thank you for that. I mean, as a dad of two daughters and even two boys, so I have 4 kids, but I think about my daughters mostly because you associate these types of crimes with young ladies. So thank you for that.
Of course.
So we talked about Arizona. We talked a little bit about California, the wacko-ness of California, but you're also in Missouri, right? You've done some stuff in Missouri.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about, I would assume Missouri is a little bit easier to deal with.
Oh gosh. Yeah. But the bill died there. Every state is so different. Every state is different with their legislative process. Every state is different with their laws. The definition of sexual abuse here is different than California, is different than Missouri. And so unfortunately the bill died in committee there. Hopefully, I'm assuming we'll bring it back this next session. But something I've learned through working specifically on Kayleigh's law is that you have to have a really driven and dedicated bill sponsor who wants to see this succeed. Because honestly, at the end of the day, even in Arizona, if the bill sponsor doesn't want to stay on top of it, it's just going to die, whether it's in committee or, they just don't hear it or things like that. But hopefully we'll bring it back in Missouri. And then I'm working in other states as well, and on Kayleigh's law, and then now some of these other things that we've been able to enact in Arizona, because again, what's portrayed is not an actuality in some of these other states. And so it's important now that we're going in, like the sex offenders having to notify schools. It's pretty close across the board, what's in the district which they live. So now we need to go back in other states and kind of clean that language up as well, and ensure that sex offenders are having to notify the schools in which their children attend that they have custody of.
Why did you choose the states you chose, like California? Was it out of proximity, or is there something there that you thought? And same with Missouri.
So Missouri, I was on a Zoom call with Jaco Bunez, and there was a senator on there, Senator McMillan from Missouri, and he's like, I'd love to sponsor this bill. So that's how we got it going in Missouri. In California, originally I had spoken to Senator Shannon Grove. She's who's done a lot of the sex crimes bills there. She just had the one, I can't think of the bill number, because it was a misdemeanor for sex trafficking in California.
That's what?
Mm-hmm. And so she was able to get it if the victim is under the age of 15 and under. They didn't want to lump 16 and 17 in. So again, sometimes you have to take the first step. You have to have a little bit of wiggle room. We can amend it later. But she was able to successfully do that. Unfortunately, that was her hyper focus. So she wasn't able to sponsor Kayleigh's Law there. So I was really grateful just through a friend in California to be able to connect with Assemblywoman Diane Dixon, who did. And although it failed, I am so grateful for her willingness to stand firm in our language and not waver in what we were demanding, which was off the top natural life, not 15 years. So although it failed to find a bill sponsor who is more worried and concerned about the language than the passage, was a blessing, especially in California.
Diane Dixon?
Yep. Assemblywoman Diane Dixon.
Republican or Democrat?
Republican.
That's rare in California. They even get a Republican anywhere.
Yeah, she is. Shannon Grove is. You know, what was interesting about that is that hearing, I knew it was going to fail, and sort of fly to Sacramento, take time away from my family. You know, showing up to testify is half of it. Kind of getting ahead in my testimony that I knew the reason they were going to kill it. And please do not be the first state in America to kill natural life protection for victims. They didn't care. The people on the committee were supposed to ask questions. They didn't. The people in opposition, they were literally talking out of their ass. I couldn't believe these words were coming out of these. I was shocked. But we pulled one Democrat to vote yes. And that was huge in committee because she didn't have to do that. That was essentially putting a target on her back, right? Like there wasn't enough votes. She knew it wasn't going to pass. She could have just gone with them and stayed and not ruffled any feathers, but she chose not to. And to me, that meant something. So if that's what we got from that, I'll take it. I'll be in contact with her shortly.
Little steps. I mean, especially in California, it's going to take a long time to get these types of things passed, but little steps and just keep persevering. You know,
and the argumentative side, the opposing side. So when we talk about probation, or how you had said the Democrats mostly being more interested of the perpetrators or the bad guys when we were talking about trafficking.
Yes.
What's interesting is we've had judges say they would be more inclined to give less of a punishment or lift a perpetrator's probation if this law was in place. It would actually be helpful because it is ultimately protecting the victim while giving leniency in all the other areas of their punishment.
It's because it's stricter and harsher that they'll be willing to kind of like combat. Is that what you're saying?
Well, no, because the victim would be protected regardless of the outcome.
Oh, I see.
They would be likely to give less or more lenient punishment or allow them to get off probation or have a lesser sentence, knowing that Kayleigh's Law was in place to ultimately protect the victim for their natural life. Because all you're saying is you're basically tying a consequence to contacting a victim, because if they get off probation, then prior to Kayleigh's Law, there was nothing in place. You would have had to prove they were harassing you or the crime in itself would not have been enough at that point to have an injunction or a restraining order. So this made the crime itself enough to have this natural life protection, preventing them from talking to you or being able to contact you in any way. So everything else is kind of on the table.
Wow.
To move around.
Does that happen a lot that you know of?
What?
So somebody gets convicted or gets probation, and then 7 years later, however many years later, they're contacting that same victim again?
I don't know. I mean, here's the sad thing is in Arizona,
they don't keep that.
I don't think victims realize that their perpetrators can get off probation, especially when they were told a lifetime. And in 2016, my abuser had petitioned. It didn't go anywhere that time. He was convicted in 2006, so it was just 10 years. But he was arrested in 2006, forgive me, convicted in 2007. Dates matter. But in 2006, he had petitioned and it didn't go anywhere. And then he did it again in 2020, but 2016. I was never contacted in 2016. So unless you've opted in for victims' rights and the probation officers are responsible for contacting the victims, talk about a conflict of interest. If they don't do that, then you have no way of knowing. How would you know? You don't. And then if you're expecting it to be lifetime, or like myself, when that chapter was closed, I thought it was closed. I never even thought about it, hardly ever. I didn't want to. I closed that chapter and moved on and had 5 kids. Like it wasn't a thing. So I think that they don't know. And so what percentage, but you do hear these crazy stories, right? About in the news about people getting out of jail or, released or something like that. And where's the first place they go? Back to the person that they committed the crime against. And so Kayleigh's law essentially was making the crime itself enough to have a lifetime injunction that would have a direct consequence tied to it if they were to, in fact, contact the victim.
Wow. This is a crazy topic, crazier than I thought, honestly. But
it's heavy. It's a lot.
It's very heavy. It's very heavy.
Is there what? So what's next in Arizona now that this passed? Is there anything else that you got?
Oh yeah.
There's more. There's more we can do. I guess that's the point. This obviously doesn't stop here. There's more we can do.
I feel like I could spend every day for the rest of my life working on this, even just in Arizona, and it still wouldn't come close to fixing all the things that are broken. So what's next? Specifically, Kayleigh's law is I call it my baby, right? Like I want to get Kayleigh's law enacted in all 50 states. So we should be back in California, Missouri, Illinois, Virginia, Florida, Texas, where else? South Carolina. So I'm working Colorado, all over just to get it drafted and going. Utah. I always need a list. But just because it's drafted doesn't mean, until the bill is filed, I don't ever really get excited because we can draft a million things. We have to get them filed. So Kayleigh's law, of course, I would love to get Kayleigh's law filed on the federal level. Now, in the grand scheme of things, having it be a federal law, it will capture a very small percentage of victims because the victim would have to be a victim of a federal sex crime. And it happens, but this is more protecting victims within a state, right? Like federal's a little bit less. However, if we can get it passed federally, then the reservations can also implement it, which is, something that unfortunately our state law does not do right now. So, and then it would be a model. We'd have a kind of foundational model, which I already have. But if we were able to get it passed on the federal level, we would have a nice model for every state to kind of take and configure the language to where it fits in with their state law. So definitely federal, I would love to do that. But in Arizona specifically, we did pass a bill that is mandating a sex offender management board. Now this is huge because right now there's no oversight. The probation department has absolutely no audit, no oversight, no anything. So there's no accountability. So the sex offender management board will kind of go in. It's compiled of 32 people, I believe, to go in, review each case by case basis, rather than just a standard. And these probation officers who are very overworked, trying to manage all their cases, get who they can off probation, those kinds of things. So that'll be big. But we would like to ultimately implement SORNA, which is the Sex Offender Registration Notification Act, here and get rid of that 19-question general risk assessment.
Of all the things, I think that's the craziest thing I've heard. This 19.
I should have brought you a copy.
19 questions.
You can look it up.
Yeah, if you're a female, 0.
0. Like that still just boggles my mind. Why would, do you have any idea why female, if a female is the victim, there would be 0. You would get a 0 for that. That seems ridiculous.
Wait, was this drafted in 1846 and you guys still couldn't vote? So you got a 0. What is going on here? What?
Listen, I have done news segments about this because we know statistically females are more likely to be sexually assaulted. Sure. Yeah. So why are they worth nothing? Because they're saying as in the people the psychologists, the prosecutor, all those people are saying that if it's a female, they're less likely to reoffend.
What? Really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How does that make any sense? Is there any stats behind that? Is there any?
Listen, if you can find me stats for anything, you'll be my favorite person in the entire world. No, there's not. This general risk assessment, what's mind-blowing to me is that we're the only state that does it. If it was that successful, other states would be doing it. It hasn't been updated in over 20 years. And they're still using this. There's no, also, the way that there's no standard for it, if that makes sense. So like certain things are kind of up for discretion. So if you have an offender who is in Gila County versus Cochise, I mean, it could be done differently with DPS. And that's one of their complaints on this, is that there's no standard or training on it. They're just whipping out these risk assessments. And then, interestingly enough, I don't think I've ever talked about this before on a podcast, or actually at all. So we passed the school notification, sex offender registration notification. We also passed a bill, that's 1236, that would require an offender who's been convicted of a dangerous crime against a child to be listed on the DPS public registry, regardless of their risk level. So that's that 5,800 that we're looking at, right? That are not on the public registry. We received a lawsuit the day after it was closed. The state of Arizona. There are 4 offenders that are suing over this, saying that it's a violation of their constitutional right and that they did not agree to being on the public registry. Now, wait a minute. You were charged, convicted, sentenced. Then you were assessed.
Yeah.
So your assessment which ultimately dictated your risk level had nothing to do with when you were charged. You didn't agree to your level when you accepted or were sentenced and convicted. That was done later. So how can that be a violation of your constitutional rights when it was done after? It's nowhere in your sentencing. You're assessed later. So I'll be curious to see how that upholds and what happens with that, because there's 19 questions that determine this.
Yeah. Look, I'm okay committing these crimes. You just can't out me in front of everybody.
Yeah. Well, God forbid we let people know who these people are. We must protect the pedophiles.
Yeah.
It's insane to me.
Well, I wonder what they get. Do they get like a 4 or a 5 score on this? Females are 0. Pedophiles get like a 4 or 5. Like it's,
I'm trying to think if there's anything with age on there. I don't know. There's not, because we asked that. There's not even an age on so if the victim is 4, then I think then you fall into a different chapter. It's 13705, but then they're also under 12. There's this weird gap in there. So they may be on the registry regardless of their level, but it just depends on the crime. It's a very, very compound.
So females are worth 0 points. We're going to protect pedophiles and let them sue because they didn't agree to be on a list.
They didn't want to be on there publicly. And then we have the great groups that come out that say that this is actually, there's no statistics or studies that prove that them being on a list keeps the community safer.
Well, we have restrictions, thinking of one specifically, of felons cannot own a firearm. So that, the Second Amendment is a constitutional right, but we have rules against convicted felons to do certain things. So it just doesn't seem like that out of bounds. Yeah. To allow people to know if you've been convicted and sentenced of a sex crime, that you should know where they're at, especially if I have children. I surely do not want my kids, or I will be very cautious about where my kids go around the neighborhood if I know there's a sex offender in the neighborhood.
If you knew your next door neighbor sexually molested a 12-year-old, would you let your girls go play at his house?
0%. Yeah. 0%.
But depending on the crime and the risk level, he may not be on there and may not have there may be nothing that requires them to disclose to anybody. And then you look up that neighborhood search, they won't pop up on there. And we call it the DCAC bill. It took us 3 years. It took me 3 years to get that signed into law. And I always like to give people, some hope and let them know, because it's not easy. It may appear that it's so not easy, but that bill took 3 years to get signed into law because we refused to give in to the retroactivity. Because why should someone committed of a dangerous crime against a child moving forward only be on the public registry? What about these approximately 5,800 offenders who've committed a dangerous crime against children? They shouldn't be on there. And so it was died in committee. It was vetoed last year. And then this year it was actually signed into law. So we were able to get it signed into law with retroactivity. So when we met with DPS, actually, they said, well, we're going to have to hire a couple more people to go through their files. And I said, but why? So they wanted a financial amount also included, a fish goal included onto the bill. I said, why do you need to hire more people for this? Well, because who's going to go through it? Well, in the state of Arizona, a sex offender, per their standard sex offender requirements, they must annually go check in with DPS to update, verify their address, their location, all of that. So if you ever look at a license and it is issued 1 year and expires the next, they're a convicted sex offender because they must annually check in with DPS.
No, I'm sure they do that all the time. I'm sure those don't slip through the cracks.
Oh, I'm sure they do. But but then if they failure to report and then the warrant, all those things, and then eventually it will catch up with them because probation will be like, hey, why didn't you go and renew your license? So I said, you don't need to hire anybody. Why don't we just update? I'm assuming you perform a questionnaire, right? Or an updated, some type of form that you do when you have these offenders come in. And they said, yeah. And I said, if it changes or whatever, I said, okay, so add a box. Was this offender convicted under 13705? If yes, then check another box that says that they must upload onto the registry. Everything else is irrelevant, right? Like, because we passed a bill if they were convicted under 13705 that they must upload onto the registry. So it doesn't matter what level they are. Then will upload onto the public registry. So they were trying to add more people and bring more people in. And they said, well, originally, I'm trying to give what time frame they asked for. And they said, we said a year, we would give them a year, right? But then they asked for 15 months, which I think is fair because this went into effect September 16th. So if anybody went in September 16th to update their, renew their registration, we're just now getting started. Why? There's nothing wrong with giving them that 3-month buffer to get things going. I don't see a problem with that. We have to have some rationale when we're doing these things. So they have until next year, would that be September, October, November, December, until December of next year to get all DCACs on the public registry. So they should all upload then. But they think that that's violating what they agreed to and that because it's retroactive, that they shouldn't upload on.
What they agreed to. I love that. We didn't agree. We didn't agree to be on this list.
This wasn't on my
agree
video.
to be abused or trafficked or whatever. But
yeah. Well, just like I didn't agree for you to be able to petition X amount of times to get off your so-called lifetime probation. Yet here I am having to live through this. And you know what? If you didn't want your picture up there and you didn't want to deal with that, maybe you shouldn't have touched a little child.
Yeah. Maybe stop committing
this
crimes.
seems pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah.
It seems that's
Isn't
pretty common sense.
Isn't it crazy?
Yeah.
And I argue with people about this. I have sex offender mommies that show up and fight with me because they're against this. Did you guys see any of that on my page? It's been a while. They stopped showing up because they were featured on my Instagram. They'd come, the Arizonans for Rational Sex Offender Laws.
What does this mean? So you said it's sex offender mommies?
Yeah, that's what
Tell me about, like, what does that mean?
Their kid.
Their kids are convicted sex offenders.
Oh, their kids are convicted.
Yeah.
Okay. They come and I'll send you, I'm going to actually say, they didn't show up at all this year. In the legislature. Last year, they were kind of hit or miss. I'm going to send you a clip of one mom whose son, actually, he should be going back to jail this next month in December for violating his probation. I'll send you the clip. He was 26 and she was 14. And she initiated it. That's what the mom says. So I'll send you a clip. But yeah, they show up there with the Arizonans for Rational Sex Offender Laws. There's NARSOL, the National Registration for Rational Sex Offender Laws, or whatever it is. NARSOL, think of it. National. Anyways, it's a whole thing.
You've got a lot of numbers and things to keep track of in your head.
I really try. But they're an interesting group. They don't think the registry does anything. They don't think our sex offender laws are rational, any of them. They made mistakes, those kinds of things. And I also go back to, they made a choice. They did not make a mistake.
Well, if it doesn't do anything, what does it matter?
There's that.
Doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't do anything.
What if they're, probably says, they probably feel, when their child becomes a sex offender, they probably feel a little guilty and maybe they're lashing out against their own guilt. I don't know.
Oh, one mom, actually it was that same mom, said that her house price will go down if her son has to register publicly. That's what she's concerned about.
Well, that's probably true, but still, sorry.
Yeah.
They can move out.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, there's
Well,
that.
that actually does bring up an interesting point. You know, you've got, let's say you're in a neighborhood and you've got all these sex offenders around you. That would drive down neighborhood prices. So get them out of there.
But then I go back to, I'm telling you, all these level ones aren't on there.
Yeah.
Like, I guarantee there's someone who lives in this proximity who's a level one that you don't know.
What would be really cool is if we could have a neighborhood for all of them that's got a giant wall around. Oh, prison. Yeah, that's right. Prison.
What do you mean? Put them in there together?
Yeah.
Segregate them?
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be. It's wild. And they're just out living their lives. And so I'm just really passionate about enhancing laws, closing these loopholes, bringing forth actualities. I'm not interested in headline catchers. I'm interested in actual laws that will make change. And, you know, it'll be interesting to see what happens the next 4 years with a new administration and everything that's coming.
It seems that's why you have so much interest around you and what you're doing, is because it seems to be 100% focused on the issues, not about anything else, not about you, not about nothing, just the issues. And I think that's why you've gained so much traction. That's why I'm fascinated to watch you, because every time there's always something going on important.
Yeah.
There's always something.
Well, think about it like this. It doesn't matter what's going on in the world. It doesn't matter what category or industry or anything. There's sex crimes happening. You can grocery store, the car dealership. I mean, it doesn't matter where you go. This impacts everybody in every area to some capacity. Rich, poor, black, white. I mean, it doesn't male, female. It doesn't matter. And we will never end anything. I don't like that. I don't like when people say end. We're not going to end this. Unfortunately, I wish we could. You know when this ends? When Jesus returns. And until then, we just have to fight to fix it as best as we can.
Yeah. And that's great. It's so good to hear someone is doing this, because you're in an infinite game. And what I mean by that is your game you never win, hopefully never lose. You just have to keep fighting.
Yeah.
And that is the hardest game to play. The one that you don't know where the finish line is. And takes a lot of bravery and just tenacity, just to get up every single day, not knowing if you're going to have a win or a loss, and knowing that there's no real finish line, but just keep persevering. Yeah. There's a lot to be said about that.
Yeah. I think, I hope when people see me, they see that I keep going, and you do win some and you do lose some, but you have to keep going. Excuse me, because if you don't, you're never going to move the needle. And I think it's also really important to take a step back and realize you don't get to the top of the mountain overnight. It is literally one step at a time. And after I refaced my abuser in 2020 and asked for them not to lift his probation and said, there's no such thing as post-probation protection. And I was bombarded after court, and they said, there is. We're going to call it Kayleigh's Law. And I thought these people were nuts. I didn't know anything about politics. I didn't know what party belonged with what color. I didn't know what animal belonged where. I didn't know. My husband's like, you don't know who our elected senator is? No, I don't even know what that means. I didn't know anything. I really didn't. But I'm living this. And so I'm living and I'm learning. But because I'm living through this, I'm that much more passionate, and that's how I'm able to retain everything. And if this is what I'm going through, how many others? And I have to fight for them. I believe that when we have knowledge, we have an obligation. I have knowledge of these things, therefore I have an obligation to do everything I can to bring awareness, but additionally bring forth solutions that can fix these problems that I have knowledge of.
Such a cool story, honestly, such a cool story. And it's so good to have somebody out there fighting and doing what you're doing. I think we're getting close to wrapping up. Do you have any final words you want to say? Anything, any pitch you want to pitch before we wrap this thing up?
Oh, always the end. We talk about so much. Like, what have I said and not said? I think, I'm so grateful. Thank you for the opportunity, both of you, to be here and talk. And I think that just a reminder to victims and survivors that I'm doing this because you still matter. And that kind of came from my 3 weeks that I had to process my abuser filing, and then we were going to court. I had 3 weeks. And I'd tell myself, why are you doing this? Like, why are you, I learned so much in that 3 weeks. And why are you torturing yourself and your kids? And why, because you still matter. That's why. And no matter how much time goes on, that I'm fighting for victims and survivors because you still matter.
Yeah. And that's the name of your organization. So you clearly believe that.
I do.
So,
and we have a long way to go. There's a lot of work to do. And I am so tired.
Well, and you have 5 kids, and, all in the range where
and
they're
there's
hard.
that. I know, it's so funny. People see my life on social media, but I feel like they don't see anything. I feel like 10% of my life is on social media. My job is to protect my kids, not exploit them and use them. And that's not what my platform is about. I like to really spread as much awareness and information pertaining to this topic as I can so that people understand what's actually going on. And I hope I've done a good job. I'm not perfect and I may mess up sometimes, but I really like to get out accurate information because I believe until we have, what's perceived is not an actuality. And so we have to change that and people need to be aware. So I really try to focus on that and what's happening with these laws. And we have a lot of work to do in Arizona and in America, just a lot of work to do. So I may be tired, but I have no intention of slowing down or stopping.
Keep going.
Are there any ways, anybody like listening or seeing it, any way they can get involved, any opportunity, volunteer opportunities? Is there anything of that nature that
I'm working on? All the things. I feel like I say that every time. I think, helping spread awareness. There is information on my website, becauseyoustillmatter.com. I'm most active on Instagram when it comes to sharing things. Session is around the corner. It starts in January, so there'll be more information. Now is kind of, quiet time, especially after the elections. But I do have my merch, 1412 Clothing, which is 1412 is the initial bill number for Kayleigh's Law. So that helps fund a lot of what we do for traveling. I make no money doing what I'm doing. My husband works a lot of overtime for me to be able to do the things that I need to do when it comes to this. But I can't walk away because of that. I have to trust and know that God will provide. But I think ultimately the biggest help is awareness so that people understand what's actually going on when it comes to these laws. So spreading the word at, whatever capacity, telling somebody, a couple friends about Kayleigh's Law, even if you don't know if they're a victim, they may benefit from knowing about this law, that there's protection available. So people don't like to walk around with a scarlet letter that they're a survivor of a crime, but you never know who could benefit and use this law for this protection. So I'm always grateful for that as well.
Well, Kayleigh, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you guys.
I appreciate it.
No, I appreciate you.
awesome?